Are you my dad? The question didn't belong to a night like this, and maybe that's why it hit harder than anything else could have. I remember the way the neon sign outside flickered against the rain, painting everything in broken red light as I wiped down the counter for the third time in 10 minutes, trying to ignore the knot in my chest that had been there all evening, the kind of feeling you get right before something changes and you don't know why yet, just that it will. The cafe was nearly empty, just me, the hum of the old refrigerator behind the bar, and the soft ticking of the wall clock creeping toward midnight, when the door chimed and she walked in, barefoot, soaked, her small hand clutching the edge of the door like she wasn't sure she was allowed to be there, her blonde hair plastered to her face, her thin jacket dripping onto the floor in quiet, steady drops. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, my voice softer than I expected, already moving toward her with a towel. "Are you okay?" She didn't answer, just looked past me like she was waiting for something or someone, her wide eyes too calm for a child standing alone at nearly 11:30 p.m. in the middle of a storm. I knelt in front of her, wrapping the towel around her shoulders, noticing how cold her skin felt, how light she seemed, like she hadn't eaten enough or slept enough or been held enough, and something inside me tightened in a way I couldn't explain. "What's your name?" I asked, but before she could answer, the low rumble of an engine rolled through the glass windows, deep and expensive, the kind of sound that didn't belong on this quiet street, and every instinct in my body went still. The headlights cut through the rain first, then the shape of the black SUV, sleek and silent as it came to a stop right outside, too deliberate to be coincidence. The door opened before the engine even fully died, and he stepped out like the storm didn't touch him, tall, composed, his coat falling perfectly into place despite the wind, his presence filling the space before he even crossed the sidewalk. I felt it before I saw it in his eyes, that shift in the air, like everything had suddenly narrowed to one point, one moment. One breath. The door chimed again as he walked in, and the room didn't just get quieter, it changed, like even the walls understood that something important had just entered. I stood up slowly, my hand still resting on the girl's shoulder, protective without thinking, but she moved before I could stop her, stepping out from behind me with small, certain steps that didn't match her size or her age, like she already knew exactly where she was going. She stopped right in front of him, tilting her head back to meet his gaze, and for a second, just a second, I saw something flicker across his face, something almost human breaking through the control. Then she asked it, clear and simple, like she was asking for the time of day, "Are you my dad?" And the man who looked like he owned everything around him, froze. No one spoke after that, not immediately, not even me, and I think that is what made it worse. The way the silence stretched just a little too long, like the world itself was waiting to see what he would do next, because a man like him did not freeze, he did not hesitate, he did not look caught off guard by anything, and yet there he was, standing completely still, his eyes locked on her face like he was seeing something that did not belong in this moment, something that should have stayed buried. I felt my hand tighten gently on her shoulder, instinct kicking in before logic could catch up, pulling her half a step back toward me as I forced a small, apologetic smile that did not feel real. "I am so sorry," I said, my voice careful, measured, trying to smooth over something I did not understand. "She must be confused, she just came in out of the rain, I think she is lost." But he did not look at me, not right away, and that was when the unease settled deeper in my chest, because most men would have glanced at the adult, would have acknowledged the situation, but he did not. He stayed focused on her like the rest of the room did not exist. The girl did not seem scared, not even a little, which made it stranger, because children always react to presence, to tone, to energy, and his presence was the kind that usually made people step back without thinking, yet she stepped forward instead, her small fingers brushing against the sleeve of his coat like she was testing something she already believed. "You did not answer," she said softly, her voice steady in a way that did not match her size, and I felt a flicker of panic rise in my chest, the kind that comes when something simple starts to feel complicated too fast. That was when he finally moved, just slightly, a breath shifting in his chest, his jaw tightening for half a second before he looked down at her more closely, really looked this time, and I saw it again, that crack in the control, subtle but there, like a memory pressing against the surface. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice low, controlled, but not cold, not the way I expected, and something about the difference made my pulse pick up. "Lily," she answered without hesitation, like she had been waiting for him to ask, and the name seemed to land somewhere inside him because his expression changed again, not dramatically, just enough to make my stomach twist. I stepped in then, unable to just stand there anymore, placing myself slightly between them without being obvious about it, because whatever this was, it was no longer normal. She said she is lost, I repeated, a little firmer this time, trying to bring the moment back into something familiar, something manageable. I was about to call someone to help find her parents. That was when his eyes finally lifted to mine, and the impact of it made me forget the rest of my sentence, because there was nothing casual in the way he looked at people, nothing distracted. It was direct, assessing, like he was reading every thought I had not said out loud. "You called anyone yet?" he asked, and I shook my head before I could think about why I was answering him at all. "Not yet," I said. I wanted to make sure she was okay first. He held my gaze for one more second, then looked back down at Lily, and when he spoke again, it was quieter, almost to himself. "How old are you?" "6, she said, then added after a pause, "almost 7, like that detail mattered." He nodded once, slow, deliberate, and I could feel something shifting in the room again, something I could not name but could not ignore either. Then, without raising his voice, without any visible signal, 2 men appeared at the door behind him, as if they had always been there waiting just outside the frame of this moment, and everything inside me went rigid because whatever this was, it had just become something I was not prepared for. "We are not calling anyone," he said, still looking at Lily, his tone leaving no space for argument, "not yet." And that was the moment I realized this was not about a lost child anymore. It was about something much bigger, something I had just stepped into without meaning to, and somehow, I was already too close to walk away. I felt it before I understood it, that quiet shift where a normal night stopped being normal and turned into something I could not control anymore, and I hated that feeling, especially in my own space, especially with a child standing beside me who should not have been anywhere near whatever this man represented. "I think we should call someone," I said again, softer this time but steadier, because repeating it made me feel like I still had a choice in this, like I could still pull things back to something safe and reasonable. But he did not even look at me when I spoke, and that was when the frustration mixed with fear in a way that made my chest tighten. Lily, on the other hand, did not seem to notice any of it, or maybe she noticed everything and simply did not care, because she reached up again, her small hand brushing against his coat as if she had done it before, as if it was familiar, and that simple motion made something flicker across his face that I could not ignore anymore. It was not confusion. It was recognition. Subtle, controlled, but there. "Do you remember me?" she asked, tilting her head slightly, her voice softer now, almost thoughtful, and I felt my breath catch because that was not a question a lost child usually asked a stranger. He did not answer right away, but his hand moved, slow and deliberate, stopping just short of touching her, like there was an invisible line he was not ready to cross yet. "Where is your mother?" he asked instead, and something in the way he said it made the word feel heavier than it should have, like it carried history I was not part of. Lily looked down for a second, her fingers twisting together in a small, nervous motion that finally made her seem like a child again. "She said I would find you," she murmured, and the room seemed to go even quieter than before, if that was possible, like even the rain outside had softened just to listen. I felt a chill run through me, the kind that starts at the back of your neck and moves slowly down your spine, because nothing about this made sense anymore, and yet it felt too specific to be random. "That is enough," I said, stepping forward fully this time, placing myself between them without pretending anymore, my hand gently guiding Lily back behind me as I forced myself to meet his eyes again, even though every instinct told me not to challenge someone like him. "She is a child, and she is clearly confused, and I am not comfortable with this situation," I continued, my voice steadier than I felt, "so either we call someone to help her or I do." The words hung in the air, heavier than I expected, and for a second I wondered if I had just made a mistake I could not take back, but then something unexpected happened. He looked at me, really looked at me this time, not as an obstacle, not as background, but as if he was weighing something, calculating something that included me in a way I did not understand. His gaze dropped briefly to my hand still resting protectively near Lily, then back to my face, and when he spoke again, his voice was lower, quieter, but somehow more intense. "You think calling someone will make her safer," he said, not as a question but as an observation, and I swallowed, forcing myself not to look away. Yes, I answered, because it was the only thing that made sense to me. He held my gaze for a long second, then exhaled slowly, like he had just made a decision he did not want to make. You do not understand what she just said, he replied, and there was something in that sentence that made my confidence falter for the first time. Behind me. I felt Lily's small hand slip into mine, her fingers cold but steady, and when I glanced down at her, she was not looking at me, she was still looking at him, her expression calm, certain, like she had already found what she came for. She is not lost, he added quietly, and that was the moment everything inside me shifted, because if she was not lost, then that meant she had come here for a reason, and somehow, impossibly, that reason was standing right in front of us. The word settled into the space between us, heavy and unmoving, and for the first time since she walked in, I did not know what to say, because if she was not lost, then every logical explanation I had been holding onto quietly slipped out of reach, leaving something else in its place, something uncertain and far more dangerous. I tightened my grip on her hand without realizing it, grounding myself in the simple fact that she was still just a child, still small, still standing behind me like I was the one who was supposed to know what to do next. Then explain it, I said, my voice quieter now but sharper, because I needed something real to hold on to, something that made sense in a way I could understand. His gaze did not leave Lily as he spoke, and that alone made my pulse quicken again. Children do not walk into the right place by accident in a storm like this, he said, each word measured, deliberate, like he had already considered every possibility before arriving here, and they do not ask questions like that without a reason. I opened my mouth to argue, to say that children said all kinds of things, that they imagined, they guessed, they reached for connections that were not there, but the words stopped before they formed because something in the way Lily's fingers tightened around mine made me hesitate. I looked down at her again, really looked this time, and there it was, something I had missed before, not obvious, not dramatic, just a small detail that should not have mattered but suddenly did, the way her eyes held steady on him without fear, without doubt, like she was waiting for him to catch up to something she already knew. Lily, I said gently, crouching down so I was level with her, trying to pull her attention back to me, back to something normal. How did you get here tonight? She blinked once, like the question surprised her, then glanced back at him before answering, as if he was part of the answer even if she did not say it out loud. I followed the lights, she said simply, and I frowned, confused. What lights? I asked, but she just shook her head slightly, like she could not explain it better than that. Behind me, I felt his presence shift, not physically, but something in the air changed again, more focused, more certain, and when I stood up, he was already watching me, not her this time, but me, like I had just become part of whatever he was trying to figure out. What is your name? He asked, and the question caught me off guard for a second before I answered. Emily, I said, then added, Emily Carter. His expression did not change much, but I saw the way his eyes narrowed just slightly, like the name meant something or did not mean enough, I could not tell which. You work here, he continued, glancing briefly around the café, taking in details I had long stopped noticing, like the worn edges of the counter, the uneven hum of the lights, the quiet signs of a place that survived more than it thrived. Yes, I said, more cautiously now, night shifts mostly. He nodded once, then looked back at Lily, and for a moment, I thought he might reach for her again, but instead, he stepped back half a step, creating space where there had been tension, and that small movement somehow felt more significant than anything else he had done so far. You cannot stay here, he said, his tone shifting into something firmer, more decisive, like whatever hesitation had been there earlier was gone now, replaced by something clearer. Neither of you can. My heart skipped, not from fear this time, but from the sudden weight of what that implied. What do you mean? I asked, my voice tightening despite myself. He held my gaze again, steady, unyielding, and there was no mistaking it now, this was not a suggestion. I mean, he said quietly, that whatever brought her here tonight is not finished yet. The rain outside hit the windows harder. Then, sharp and steady, like a reminder that the world beyond this room had not stopped, and yet inside, everything felt suspended, balanced on a decision I had not agreed to make. I looked down at Lily one more time, searching for something, any sign that this was not real, but she just looked back at me calmly, her small hand still in mine, and whispered, almost like she was reassuring me instead of the other way around, "It is okay," and somehow, that made it even harder to believe. Her words should have calmed me, but they did not even close, because children were not supposed to sound certain in situations like this. They were supposed to cling, to cry, to look for something familiar, and Lily did none of those things. She just stood there like she had already crossed a line the rest of us could not even see yet. I straightened slowly, my hand still wrapped around hers, and shook my head before I even realized I was doing it. "No," I said, more to myself than to him at first, then louder, steadier, "No, I am not going anywhere with someone I do not know, and neither is she." The words felt solid when I said them, like something I could stand on, but the moment they left my mouth, I saw that same calculating stillness return to his expression, not anger, not frustration, just quiet assessment, like he was adjusting his approach instead of reacting to mine. "You think this is about trust?" he said, his voice low but clear. "It is not." I opened my mouth to respond, but he continued before I could, his gaze flicking briefly toward the window where the rain blurred everything beyond the glass into streaks of gray and white. "You said you have not called anyone yet," he added, and I nodded cautiously, unsure where he was going with this. "Good," he said, almost to himself, then turned slightly, addressing the men near the door without raising his voice. "No calls go out from this location." My stomach dropped at the quiet authority in that statement, at how easily it was given and how quickly it was accepted, like it was not a suggestion but a rule that had always existed. "You cannot do that," I said immediately, the words sharper than I intended, because whatever this situation was becoming, it was crossing into something I could not ignore anymore. His eyes returned to mine, steady, unwavering. "I already did," he replied, and there was no threat in his tone, just fact, which somehow made it worse. Behind me, I felt Lily shift slightly, her hand tightening in mine again, but not in fear, more like anticipation, and that unsettled me in a way I could not explain. "Emily," he said then, using my name for the first time, and the way it sounded in his voice made my attention snap back to him. "Look at her." The request caught me off guard, but I did it anyway, glancing down at Lily again, searching for something I had missed, something that would explain why this felt so wrong and so intentional at the same time. "Look closer," he added, quieter now, and I frowned slightly, confused, but I focused, really focused this time, on the small details I had overlooked in the rush of everything else, the shape of her face, the line of her jaw, the way her eyes held steady even when she was quiet, and then I saw it, not clearly, not in a way I could immediately define, but enough to make my breath hitch, because there was something familiar there, something that did not belong to me and yet felt like it should have been recognized. I looked back up at him without meaning to, and the moment our eyes met, I knew he had seen it too, or maybe he had seen it first. "You see it," he said softly, not asking, just confirming, and I shook my head instinctively, even though part of me knew I was lying. "No," I said, but my voice did not carry the certainty I wanted it to. Lily tugged gently on my hand then, pulling my attention back down to her, and when I met her gaze, she smiled, small and quiet, like she was reassuring me again. "He looks like the picture," she said, and the words landed harder than anything else had so far, because pictures meant memory, meant someone had shown her something, meant this was not just a child guessing in the dark. "What picture?" I asked quickly, my voice tightening despite myself, but she just looked back at him instead of answering me, like the explanation belonged to him now. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls closer, the air heavier, and I realized with a sharp clarity that whatever this was, it had started long before tonight, long before she walked through that door, and somehow, without warning, I had just stepped into the middle of it. The word picture echoed in my head in a way that made everything feel sharper, louder, like the world had tilted just enough to throw off my balance, and I hated that I could not ignore it anymore, that I could not just brush this off as coincidence or confusion, because children did not invent details like that without something behind them. "Lily," I said carefully, crouching down again so I was eye level with her, forcing my voice to stay calm even though my thoughts were not. "What picture are you talking about?" She hesitated this time, just for a second, her fingers tightening around mine as she glanced up at him again, like she was checking something invisible between them before answering. "Mommy keeps it," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper now, "in the drawer by the bed. She said it was important." My chest tightened at that because there was something intimate about that detail, something real, not imagined, and when I looked back up at him, his expression had shifted again, not dramatically, but enough that I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his shoulders had gone slightly rigid like he was holding something in place. "What does the picture look like?" he asked, his voice lower than before, controlled but carrying something underneath it that felt dangerously close to breaking through. Lily smiled faintly, like she was remembering something warm. "You were standing by the water," she said, her eyes still on him, "and Mommy was laughing, and you were not smiling, but she said you were happy anyway." The silence that followed was heavier than anything that had come before it, pressing in from all sides until it felt hard to breathe, and I saw it then, clear as anything I had ever seen, the way that memory landed inside him, the way it did not surprise him as much as it confirmed something he had not wanted to say out loud. I stood slowly, my mind racing, trying to piece together something that made sense, something that fit into a reality I understood, but nothing did, because this was not supposed to happen, not here, not like this. "This is not possible," I said quietly, more to myself than to him, but he heard it anyway. "It is," he replied just as quietly, and the certainty in his voice made my stomach drop. I shook my head again, stepping back slightly, pulling Lily with me without thinking, creating space that felt necessary even if I could not explain why. "Even if that picture exists," I said, forcing the words out carefully, "that does not mean anything. People can look similar, memories can be wrong, this does not mean that she belongs to you." The moment I said it, I realized what I had implied, and the tension in the room shifted instantly, sharper now, more focused. His eyes locked onto mine again, not angry, not offended, but intense in a way that made it impossible to look away. "I did not say she belongs to me," he said, his tone measured, each word deliberate. "I said she came here for a reason." Behind me, Lily's hand slipped from mine, and before I could react, she stepped forward again, closing the distance between them like there had never been any doubt in her mind. She reached into the small pocket of her jacket, her movement slow, careful, and pulled out something I had not noticed before, a folded piece of paper, worn at the edges like it had been handled many times. "This is the picture," she said, holding it up toward him, and for the first time since he walked in, his composure broke just slightly, just enough to be real. He hesitated before taking it, like that small piece of paper carried more weight than anything else in the room, and when he finally did, unfolding it with controlled precision, I found myself holding my breath without realizing it, because whatever was on that paper was about to change everything, and somehow, I already knew there was no going back after this. The moment he took the paper, everything slowed, not in a dramatic way, not like the world stopped, but like my mind refused to move forward until I saw what he saw, until I understood what had just stepped into my life without warning. His fingers held the edges carefully, almost too carefully, like he already knew what was there and just needed to confirm it, and when he unfolded it, I caught a glimpse before I could stop myself, just enough to see the outline of two figures standing side by side near a body of water, the colors faded, the edges worn, but the image still clear enough to recognize what mattered. It was him. There was no question, no doubt, no room for coincidence. The man standing in front of me, composed and controlled, was the same man in that picture, younger maybe, less guarded, but unmistakably him. And next to him, a woman, her face turned slightly toward him, her smile bright in a way that felt almost out of place compared to the stillness I had seen in him tonight. I did not know her, but something about the way she stood close to him, the way her hand seemed to reach toward his arm, made it clear that whoever she was, she had mattered. I looked back up at him, my breath catching as I watched the subtle changes in his expression, the way his eyes lingered on the image longer than they needed to, the way his jaw tightened just enough to betray something deeper beneath the surface. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice lower now, quieter, but carrying a weight that had not been there before, and Lily answered without hesitation. "Mommy gave it to me," she said simply, like that explained everything. His gaze flicked to her, sharp now, searching, and for the first time, I saw something that looked almost like disbelief break through his control. "What is your mother's name?" he asked, and the question felt different this time, not just curious, but necessary, like the answer mattered more than anything else in this moment. Lily hesitated again, just briefly, her fingers twisting together as she looked down at the floor, then back up at him. She said I should tell you only when I found you, she murmured, her voice softer now, more careful, and the room seemed to tighten around us, like the walls were leaning in to hear what came next. I felt my heart start to pound, not from fear, but from the overwhelming sense that something bigger was unfolding right in front of me, something I had no control over but could not walk away from either. Lily, I said gently, stepping closer again, my voice steady but quiet, it is okay, you can tell us. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a second, I thought she might refuse, might hold on to whatever promise she had been given, but then her expression softened, just slightly, like she trusted me enough to share it. She turned back to him, her small shoulders straightening in a way that did not belong to a child her age, and spoke clearly, each word landing with a weight I could feel in my chest. Her name is Anna, she said, and I felt the shift before I even saw it, the way the air changed, the way his entire body seemed to still in a different way than before, not frozen this time, but grounded, like something inside him had just locked into place. The name hung between us, simple, ordinary, and yet powerful enough to change everything, and I realized in that moment that whatever connection this was, whatever past had led to this night, it was no longer a question of if it was real, it was a question of what it meant, and how far it was about to pull all of us in. The name did not echo out loud, but it echoed inside him. I could see it in the way his breathing changed, barely noticeable, but there, like something long buried, had just been uncovered without warning. Anna, he repeated quietly, not as a question, not as doubt, but as recognition, and that single word carried more weight than anything else that had been said tonight. I watched him carefully, trying to understand what I was seeing, because this was no longer about a lost child or a strange coincidence, this was about history, about something real that had not ended the way it was supposed to. That is not possible, I said again, softer this time, because even though I could see it unfolding, part of me still resisted it, still needed logic to hold on to. His eyes lifted to mine slowly, and whatever I had been expecting, it was not what I found there. There was no anger, no denial, just a quiet certainty that made my words feel small in comparison. It is, he said, just as calmly as before, but now there was something else underneath it, something heavier, something that sounded like memory. I felt Lily move beside me again, her small hand slipping away as she stepped closer to him, unafraid, unhesitating, like this distance between them had never made sense to her in the first place. Mommy said you would not believe it at first, she added, her voice soft but steady, and I felt my chest tighten again at the way she spoke about it, like she had been prepared for this moment, like this was something she had been told to do. He lowered his gaze to her, studying her face again, not quickly this time, but slowly, deliberately, like he was tracing every detail, every feature, searching for something that matched what he already knew. Where is she? He asked, and this time the question was not controlled, not detached, it was direct, almost urgent in a way that did not fit the man who had walked into this cafe minutes ago. Lily looked down again, her fingers brushing against the edge of her jacket, and for the first time since she arrived, I saw something change in her expression, something softer, something more uncertain. She could not come, she said quietly, and that simple answer seemed to hit harder than anything else. The room fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now, not waiting, not tense, but heavy with understanding that had not been spoken yet. Why? He asked, and the single word carried more than just curiosity, it carried expectation, fear, and something else I could not name. Lily hesitated longer this time, her small shoulders rising slightly as she took a breath, and when she looked back up at him, her eyes held something that did not belong to a child her age. She said if I found you, you would know what to do, she answered, and I felt something shift inside me again, because that was not an answer, it was a message passed through a child who did not fully understand it but carried it anyway. I stepped forward without thinking, my voice softer now, less resistant, more uncertain. What happened to her? I asked, not sure if I wanted the answer but unable to stop myself from asking. He did not respond right away, his gaze still fixed on Lily, like he was trying to read something deeper than her words, something hidden in the spaces between them. Then, slowly, he folded the picture again, careful, precise, like it mattered how it was handled, and slipped it into his coat. When he finally looked up, his expression had changed again, not softer, not harder, but more resolved, like a decision had been made somewhere beneath the surface. We are leaving, he said quietly, and this time, it was not just a statement, it was a turning point, because whatever came next was no longer optional, not for him, and somehow, I knew, not for us either. The words landed with a finality that made the room feel smaller, like the walls had shifted inward without warning, and for a second I just stood there, staring at him, trying to understand how everything had moved so fast from a quiet night to this moment where leaving felt like the only option he was offering. "We are not just leaving," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, because even now, even with everything that had happened, I needed something to hold on to, something that still made sense. His gaze moved to me again, calm, direct, but different now, not just assessing, not just observing, but including me in a way that made my chest tighten. "You are coming with us," he said, and there was no hesitation in it, no room for negotiation, just quiet certainty. I shook my head immediately, instinct rising before thought. "No," I said, firmer this time, "I do not even know you, and I am not taking a child somewhere without understanding what is happening." For a moment, I thought he might argue, might push back the way I expected someone like him would, but instead, he held my gaze, steady and unyielding, like he was measuring something deeper than my words. "You already understand more than you think," he replied quietly, and I felt the truth of that settle somewhere uncomfortable inside me, because despite everything, part of me did understand, or at least sense that this was not random, that Lily had not come here by accident, that the name she spoke and the picture she carried were pieces of something real. Behind me, Lily stepped closer again, her small hand finding mine once more, and when I looked down at her, she was watching me now, not him, her expression calm but hopeful, like she was waiting for me to decide something important. "It is okay," she whispered again, the same quiet reassurance she had given me before, and this time, it did not feel like something I could ignore. I exhaled slowly, my thoughts racing, weighing everything I knew against everything I did not, and realizing that staying here, pretending this could go back to normal, was no longer an option either. I looked back up at him, searching his face for something, anything that felt human, something that told me this was not a mistake I would regret, and for the first time since he walked in, I saw it clearly, not just power, not just control, but something else beneath it, something steady, something that did not look away when things became complicated. "If we go," I said carefully, choosing each word, "you tell me everything, no half answers, no secrets." He did not respond immediately, but he did not look away either, and after a second, he gave a single, deliberate nod. "Everything," he said, and the way he said it made it feel like a promise, not just to me, but to something larger than this moment. The rain outside had softened, no longer pounding against the windows, just a steady rhythm that filled the silence as I reached for my coat without fully deciding to, my body moving before my mind caught up. I turned off the lights behind the counter, the café falling into shadow as I stepped toward the door, Lily's hand still in mine, his presence just ahead of us, leading without forcing, and as I pushed the door open, the cool air hit my face, sharp and real, grounding in a way nothing else had been tonight. I hesitated for half a second on the threshold, looking back at the empty room, at the life I had